It's 7:32. It's 7:32. You're not doing your job, Bruce.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock, I'm going to open up the meeting of the Government Operations and Ordinances Committee. We have two items on the agenda this evening, the Laconia Historic Overlay District proposal and the short-term lodging proposal. Because I think there's more people here who are interested in the Laconia Historic Overlay District proposal, I'm going to take this out of order, and I'm going to deal with the short-term lodging proposal, the draft proposal that we all have. Does everybody have a copy of that? It looks like this. And I'm going to ask our Director of Planning, Dean Trefethen, to just briefly explain where we're at with this.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As you know, we had a proposal for an ordinance for short-term lodging, better known as the Airbnb situation. We have been through a couple of go-rounds on the language. We've been through our legal counsel, and the latest and greatest is the third draft that says May 17th. So if that's the one that everyone's looking at,
Yeah.
we are good to go. There's basically two primary objectives here. The first one is to, as is stated in the definition, or the short M, is to preserve the traditional character of residential neighborhoods. And then the second major thing that we're trying to do here is safety. There's an expectation, I believe, on the part of people who are doing rentals of any kind, but particularly in this kind of a rental, that the unit that they're going into is as safe as, say, a hotel room or a motel room. Hotel, motels, cottage colonies are commercial properties, and they are inspected at a greater frequency than almost any single-family home ever is. We have a number of summer cottages and second homes and even primary homes that have never been inspected by the city because they were built prior to the building code or building inspections and those kinds of things. So that is probably not the expectation of most people. So when you get into the little I, the little Roman I, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all of those items are related to safety, and that is the inspection criteria. So that's the crux of what we're trying to accomplish. I did send out an email earlier today. I don't know if you all had a chance to read it or not, but I have a couple of comments and discussion points for you. The first one is in section where there's a section under M1 subsection A. The application will be made by the property owner, obviously, and they will pay the review fee and the abutter notification fees. And I wanted to talk for a moment about notifying abutters or not notifying abutters. Under the administrative approval process that we currently use for a number of different things, we probably have 7 to 10 administrative approvals that we do in the course of on an average month. We don't notify abutters. So these administrative approvals are a change of use in a business. For instance, it goes from a clothing store to a barbershop, or it goes from a retail store to an office space. Those kinds of things are administrative approvals in many, many cases. And we do not notify abutters. We just look at the situation, do an inspection on the property, and we either approve or not approve the use as applied for. Now, having said that, there's no reason that, as a policy decision, that we can't make the decision to have the policy that in this particular case, we are going to notify abutters. The intention here is to notify them once the decision is made, not prior to the decision. So the applicant would come in, make application, we would review the application and the property, make a decision on whether it's appropriate given the circumstances and all the information that we're going to gather, and then notify the property owner that you're approved or you're not approved. And if they are approved, we would then send out notification to the abutters. That was the intent of the original thing. I just want to bring up the issue of whether we want to do that or not. There's lots of pros to doing that in terms of the neighborhood being informed and having understanding what's going on in the building next to them. One of the cons, and there may be more than one, but is related to most people probably do not want this activity occurring next door to them and probably would object simply on the basis of objecting. And that is within their right. I totally get it, I understand that, but this is a policy decision that we're going to have to make somewhere along the line in this process. So I just want you to be aware of, there's a couple of different ways to go here.
Well, what's wrong with notifying the abutters upon the application, but continuing the review process anyway, and making a decision?
The intention was to not notify the abutters until after the decision was made. Then they would have a 30-day appeal process. Obviously, if we do not notify the abutters at all, it would be very difficult for them to know that this is going on next to them, and therefore their 30-day period would run out and they may not even know it.
So just for clarification, would there be a 30-day period in which the applicant would not be able to conduct business as a short-term lodging? Or once the approval is made, are they able to go forward and then deal with whatever objections?
Generally speaking, when we give approval, the approval is immediate. If we were to receive an appeal, and this would be true of any number of different situations, not just short-term rentals, then we would have the situation cease until the appeal has been resolved. So if nobody objects, then they're good to go and away they go. But if someone were to object, then we would say,
Put the brakes on?
yeah.
Andrew?
Mr. Chairman, my concern with this is that you're notifying people after it's already been approved, when it seems to me, if I were in a butter, I'd be coming late to the hearing process or the due process to say, hey, I've got a real problem with this being an Airbnb right next to my property, and it's going to have a detrimental impact on the value of my property and my neighborhood. And if our goal is to preserve the quality and quantity of housing stock for year-round residential use, then the timing of this bothers me.
Okay. All right.
And if the decision is that we want to do the notification of abutters, a few days after we get the application and while we're going through the process, and if that's the decision that's made, I'm fine with that.
The clock still wouldn't start to tick until after approval, though, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
30-day period would not start
Correct.
until the decision was made. Because the applicant also could have that 30-day appeal process. If we say no, they could appeal that decision. Would work both ways. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and that's on page 2 in section 5, maximum of 12 separate rentals or a maximum of 184 days, whichever occurs first. I'm not concerned about the 184 days because that's the ultimate definition of a short-term rental, but I'm not sure what the right number of separate rentals is. I know we kind of came up with the 12
One a month,
couple of
huh?
months ago.
Yep.
I'm not sure that's the right number. I don't know what the right number is. And second of all, I don't know how we keep track or enforce it. I know abutters may very well keep track of it, but I'm not sure that they would necessarily be 100% accurate, because sometimes the use of the property may be family and they're going to assume it's a short-term rental and counting. I mean, it's hard to keep track of this, so I don't know if there's anything gained by having that number at all. It could be, but I'm not sure. I'm just raising the issue.
Well, we have an issue with how we're going to enforce ordinances all the time. I mean, it's not unique to short-term housing. It's something that comes with the territory.
Our number one enforcement
There's complaints.
is abutters.
Right.
It doesn't matter what relationship it is, whether it's code enforcement or zoning or anything else. It's true.
I guess I have two issues. I'm concerned with the number. I think it needs to be larger, but I also thought we had said something about the weirs being excluded from this.
Well, currently, under the current definition that we're using, calling this a rooming or a boarding house, the CR district, which is the Weirs, and then the SFR district, which is the residential district next to the Weirs, allow rooming and boarding houses. Therefore, they allow short-term rentals with an administrative approval, which we have been doing, and this year we've probably given out 12 or 15 administrative approvals for people who have heard, that this is going on, and they know that they've got to get this thing, and plus various condo and homeowner associations have made their members aware that this is occurring and that they need to do this. So that's a good thing. So yeah, it's allowed. Now, under this proposal, it would be allowed in all residential zones of the city.
But this would then limit
Correct.
in the CR zone.
Correct. I mean, you could do a two-tier thing where you could say in CR and SFR, it's unlimited, and then in other zones, it's limited. Again, you go back to that, how do you keep track issue, and
Yeah, I mean, just for me, the Weirs is largely has always been a zone where people,
yeah, doing that kind of activity.
Lodge.
But as we've found out, if you're anywhere in the city on the waterfront, you've got a high degree of probability that at least one of your neighbors is doing it, at least occasionally. And surprisingly, there is a number of non-waterfront properties that are doing it as well and people rent those for a variety of different reasons, not necessarily for, quote, vacation, but business trips or family visits or whatever it happens to be. But
Well, we could easily just carve out the CR zone and the SFR zone and just say the old rules apply.
those are unlimited.
That
and
would be-
Yes,
that
you
would-
could do that, yep.
Be easy.
So I just wanted to raise basically those two issues with the wording that we have presented to you and that's been out there for a little while. We don't have to make a decision on any of those items tonight,
So,
just
okay,
feedback and whatever you want to do with that information.
thank you.
Other than that, I think that not my decision to make, obviously, but I think we're ready to go for a reference to the planning board if subcommittee and then the council decided to do that. With this wording, with maybe a couple of suggestions of look at these couple of provisions.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Any other further comments from the committee?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I'll open this up to anybody from the public who would like to comment on this. Is there anybody here who would like to make a comment on the short-term housing, short-term lodging proposal? Okay. Sensing none.
All that wave in here.
Oh, wait a minute. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paulette Lachlan, and I live in Laconia. I didn't come to this meeting for this reason. I do know that there are Airbnbs in my neighborhood. I'm not really thrilled about it. So I guess there's a lot I don't know about this. It's probably my own fault. But the listening to this, is this opening up something and giving more permission? Is it restricting it? It sounds like, 12 months a year sounds like, 12 out of a year sounds like a lot to me, because most people are not renting them in the middle of winter. So that's a lot in the summer. So that's my question to you. Is this being decided tonight? Is this is just something proposed by the planning?
This is just a proposal that came from the city council,
Okay.
and it stopped on its way to wherever it's going. It came here to this committee for recommendations. It will go back to the council because that doesn't happen in all cases, but in this case it will, because I said I'd send it back to the council. But after the council reviews it, it will then go to the planning board, and there'll be further discussions. And if the planning board adopts a specific proposal, whether it's 184 days or 12 months or what the fee structure is or anything like that, then they will send out a public notice, and there'll be a hearing before the planning board, and then the planning board will vote up or down on the issue and send it over to the, if they vote to adopt it, they'll then send it to the city council for review. And ultimately, the city council would usually hold another hearing, but they don't have to.
Okay.
And after the public hearing before the council, then the council would make a decision as to whether to adopt this proposal. But the answer to your first question is, right now in our residential neighborhoods, short-term lodging is not allowed. It's just not allowed. So we're trying to deal with those kinds of issues that arise, understanding that some people use Airbnb or whatever medium they do, and people are respectful of it, and it works, and some situations create problems. So this really came before the council based upon a complaint about someone who was doing short-term rentals in a particular neighborhood in Laconia. And that's how the ball got rolling here.
So that it's not presently something that's allowed by the city, or?
All except for the CR zone and the SFR zone. Only those two zones permit short-term lodging.
Okay.
That's right. And this would change that so that all zones in Laconia would permit short-term lodging with these rules.
Okay. So if people aren't in favor of that expansion, they should come to these meetings? Is that
Yes, this is going to go. This is going to go back to the city council. The city council is going to make a decision as to whether to put it to the planning board for further consideration. If they do that, then it'll go to the planning board, and it'll kick around there until somebody says, "I think this is a good final version," and then the planning board will take a vote to publish that and to send it to public hearing. After that occurs, the next meeting of the planning board will have the public hearing and then move to either adopt the ordinance or recommend the adoption of the ordinance. And at that point, it'll go back to the city council, because the city council is the only body that can, in fact, change an ordinance.
Okay.
So that's the process.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I almost missed Paulette. I don't want to miss anybody else. Is there anybody else who wants to be heard on short-term lodging? Okay. This is what my proposal is. My proposal is that we take this short-term lodging proposal, with the concerns that were expressed by Dean and expressed by Counselor Hosmer about when people would get notice of an application, with the concerns about fees, my concerns about fees and how that's going to be structured, and with the concerns of the duration of the lodging. Is it 12 separate times? Is it 184 days? With those concerns, I would look for a vote that we recommend that we send this proposal over to the City Council, as I promised to do when we first considered it at the City Council meeting. And
We also discussed the CR and
Yeah.
SFR
yes,
change.
my mistake. Yeah, with the proposal that we consider carving out of this an exception for the CR and SFR zones, since they currently do short-term lodging and have been doing it for some time.
Thank you.
So that's what I'm looking for a vote for. Have I got someone to make a motion like that?
I'll make the motion.
And I got a second. Is there discussion?
We're trying to keep this brief, Counselor.
I still got to ask the question, is there discussion? Okay, sensing no discussion. All those in favor of sending this on to the City Council as outlined, raise your hand. It's unanimous. Okay. I'm going to close the meeting as it relates to short-term housing. 7:22. Okay, I'm going to open the meeting with respect to the Laconia Historic Overlay District proposal. And I'm going to ask members of, the committee, whether you've had a chance to review the current proposal with amendments. The amendments come in red and blue and purple, is that right? With comments from legal counsel. Has everybody had have you folks on the committee had an opportunity to review that?
I have.
Is there any suggested changes that you would like to make?
Okay.
I've got those, and I'm going to ask them, yeah. While you're
Thank you.
in the process of reviewing this and coming up with any comments or suggestions, today we also received from Dean Trefethan his comments on the Historic District proposal. I'll ask you, have you got those, folks? I think you do. And I'll ask Dean to come up once again and give us a brief overview of your concerns and of the ordinance.
So let me start at the bottom of my letter, because I think this is important. I am supportive of the district overall. That could protect buildings from being demolished or significantly altered, or from being overshadowed by a modern adjacent building. Having said that, I got a couple of things that I want to go through that are, most of these are just housekeeping. So on page 1, there's the makeup of the Historic District Commission. There's a range suggested, and I would suggest that you make it a set number. I would suggest 5, but if you make it 7, that's fine. I think 3 is probably too few, and an odd number is usually better than an even number.
It's just
Just
easier
for-
to get to a quorum.
Get easier, yeah, well, that and voting makes things easier. But with a range of membership, it's hard to set what constitutes a full board and what constitutes a quorum. So I would say you need to have a set number. Make it 3, make it 5, make it 7, make it 6, make it 4, whatever it is you decide, but a set number. In the identification of the historic overlay district, there are 3 lots listed. There should be 4 lots listed because there's a little lot in the middle that's owned by the city that contains the war memorials in Veterans Square. And so that would be, we need to create a district as opposed to individual lots so that we avoid the concept of spot zoning. So if we include that 4th lot in there, then we have a contiguous district. Otherwise, you have kind of a interrupted district.
Jigsaw puzzle.
And then one of the lot numbers is listed as wrong. It's listed as 325-44-1, and it should be 425-44-1.
You wouldn't listen to me, though.
And then I know that the original district proposed to you was laser focused. And I get that, and I completely understand why it was done the way it was done. Given that the reason for the laser focus may be somewhat diminished, given the circumstances. I think if you're going to have an historic district, that you should encompass probably a little bit larger area, and I would suggest that you include the Tavern Building, the Masonic Building, the other 2 churches that front Veterans Square. You might also want to jog it so that you include the post office, City Hall, and the 2 mill buildings. I know that most people probably don't consider City Hall to be an historic building, but it's getting there. And it was designed in a certain, and there's nothing wrong with City Hall, don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But it was designed architecturally to be reminiscent of the 2 mill buildings that are right next door. And yes, it's a modern-looking building to some degree, but it's also got the echoes of the 2 mill buildings, and it was obviously architecturally designed to do that exact thing, and that's the kind of thing that you want to promote and preserve within an historic district, in my opinion. Let's see here. On page 5 and 6, there's activity exempt from review. And paragraph number 4 contains some things in it that are already occurring at businesses at the train station. And while they may be considered grandfathered at this point in time, I just wanted to point out to you, though, that under the proposed ordinance, you can't have a patio, a barbecue pit, or other yard appurtenances, which I probably am not saying that word right. But we already have a patio situation at the train station. We already have a restaurant there that uses a barbecue pit on occasions. And we also do a number of activities within the property over the course of the year, including a pumpkin festival that, with a very strict interpretation of the historic district, may not be possible. So I also would point out that part of the train station has already been altered with modern glass features at the Pleasant Street end of the building, which again would be grandfathered under this situation, but probably would not be permitted under an historic district type situation in the future. So it's just something to consider when you look at the overall scope of this, of how things can be restricted. And then there's a few places, several places throughout the proposed ordinance refers to reporting things to the planning office or to the code department or to the zoning enforcement official or to the code enforcement official. And in many cases, some of these items that would be reported would go to both departments, both type of people, so I think it would be important to either, expand the wording to include all those functions, or come up with a different wording to be reported to the proper officials, or some kind of word along that line that would cover the broad spectrum of the various enforcement. They all happen to be in my department, but they are different functions, and they have legal definitions under state statutes and everything else that they can and cannot do. So it's important to, the zoning official can't go out and do a building code infraction and vice versa,
Okay.
type thing. So,
Anything else?
nope. Other than that,
Okay, I have a question for you. If we were to include the tavern, the Masonic temple, if we were to include some of those downtown buildings, and I'm not excluding anything, because there's a lot of, the McIntyre building, there's a lot of buildings down there that have been around for a long time and have some historic significance. If we were to create an overlay district that was narrow, as you suggested, by just including the Veterans Square, that was larger, that included the two churches, the tavern, the Masonic temple, perhaps the McIntyre building, or one of the other two buildings on Main Street. What kind of impact do you foresee that might have on what I'll call performance zoning, which is now, it's going to go into effect, if it's not already gone into effect? And is there any language that we need to use to address that in the historic overlay district? Just a thought. I know I might be catching you by some.
no, that question has been raised. The short answer is I don't think so, because under the performance zoning proposal, there are two sentences, and one sentence specifies the kinds of things that performance zoning will alleviate a developer from, and then there's a second sentence that says essentially all other zoning regulations will still apply. This would be an other zoning regulation that would still apply. So that's why I think the short answer is no. I think you're covered, but it would be very easy in the performance zoning to just add the phrase all other zoning ordinances still apply, including the historic district or something to that effect, just to make it very, very clear. Now, having said that, that covers the legal aspect of the question. It probably would have a very minor but a possible dampening effect on some properties that people might consider using the performance zoning, but then if their buildings are covered by the historic district, they may decide not to. But I can't give you an example of what that might be, because we have no proposals before us right now for anything
It's just a concern
anyway.
that I have, because, as you know, one of the things the council has been trying to do is to enhance the downtown, create more economic opportunity downtown. There's the Colonial Theater, there's a number of other opportunities, and I just have a concern that may impact it in a negative way, but I don't know enough about it, quite frankly, to say it would or wouldn't.
I don't think so. I mean, we have, unfortunately, a significant number of empty storefronts which are available to be rented and as is, or with minor to moderate
Okay.
rehabilitation, or just some remodeling. So that could occur with or without performance zoning, and that could occur more than likely with or without an historic district. I don't think it makes any difference that way. From an anecdotal type situation, downtowns that feature historic buildings or quaint, old-looking buildings, however you want to put it, generally speaking, have more appeal overall than, say, a modern downtown, which, you know, in New England, we don't have necessarily a lot of those, but when you go to other places of the country, it's kind of tough to revitalize a downtown that's got, you know, a bunch of 1970s and 80s buildings in it, and, you know, whereas we have a number of buildings that are considerably older than that, so.
Okay. Thank you. Now I'll go back to my, well, first of all, any questions for Dean? Okay, now I'll go back to my original questions. Are there any, you don't need to be specific, you don't need to be specific to the language, but are there any concerns that, other than that's been expressed by our legal opinion, but expressed by Dean, are there any things that you would want to include or exclude from this document? And again, you don't have to be specific, but I would like to get from the committee a general sense of what may or may not be included, what considerations have been overlooked, what considerations might be too drastic or not necessary. I'm looking for the committee right now. Take your time.
I'll start. I do want to spend more time. We got these this morning with the changes that have been recommended, and I'm happy with a lot of what I've seen. I just worry about when we get down to describing lighting and windows and whatever. I don't know if we're going too far. I'm okay with creating a historic district. I'm more than okay with dealing with the church. And I do have a question specific to that at some point this evening. But I just want us to be very careful. I mean, I expressed the last time we discussed this, that stuff that we do in haste doesn't always turn out right, and that's my concern here.
Well, we've kind of had this on the fast track, I agree, so.
I mean, I think Dean sort of points out that there are, you know, there are things in here that have double edges, and I want to make sure we're aware of all those edges before we finalize this.
Well, just so you'll know the process here, this is a proposal that's come through the council to this committee for review. Now, this can go back to the council, or it can go to the planning board, but we're not in a position, obviously, to adopt anything tonight with respect to this. So there's still a process ahead that whether it goes back to the council and then to the planning board or straight to the planning board is a decision that we might make, but the process is far from complete, and we're sort of just starting. So that's my comment.
I guess my comment on this is I appreciate Dean's thoughtfulness and input on this. I'm not in a position where I'd say I'm willing to adopt his suggestions, but I appreciate what he's saying. My thought process here is this is truly a work in progress and probably going a little faster than something like this might ordinarily go. I would prefer to keep the footprint still very small, though the Masonic Temple and the mills and the tavern may very well fit nicely into a historic overlay district and we should think about it. I think what we run into there is we're bumping up against some more private property owners that may be affected by this, and that would require us to perhaps slow down even more here. So I think keeping it in its original footprint we have right here, including Veterans Park and adding that parcel in there, is a good place to start. I like the fact that we have gone 3 to 7 members, because I think it seems to me that it's difficult sometimes to find all the people you need to fill these commissions, and having a range, at least when it comes to boards of directors, it seems to me having a range seems to have worked out pretty well in my experience. But I do share your concern, Councilor Cheney, and I know I've had an opportunity to speak about things like this with Councilor Hamel before, about are we getting down to doorknobs and windowsills that are then, we're so deep in the weeds there that I'm not sure, is it a worthy endeavor at that point? But I would recommend that perhaps we forward this along to the planning committee, knowing full well it's a work in progress and they will have some input, and certainly we can share this with our fellow council members for more input.
I don't mind putting this on a track where we're dealing with it in a more timely way than we might with other matters, as long as we're thorough about it. I mean, there's nothing to prevent us to say, here's the timelines we'd like to cover and when we'd like to do it. But as long as we're thorough about it, not just putting together a kind of cut and paste version of one ordinance in another part of the state and then moving on that. As long as we're thorough about what we're doing with the historical overlay district, fast is not necessarily bad. And it might be a good idea to keep the footprint small, to include Veterans Square. But again, I think you might have read council's comments that it's starting to look like spot zoning. And so I just want us to be careful about how we would go about that.
Mm-hmm.
But, so any other comments from the committee? Okay, now I'll open it up to, yeah.
So just from a staff perspective, in trying to get the sense of where you're at with this tonight, the only changes I'm hearing as of this moment is that you would take care of the Scribner's error in the tax lot number, and then also include that one small parcel that wasn't included where the monuments are in Veterans Square. And other than that, at this point, whatever the edits that were suggested in the various colors would all be included and incorporated in the final document that was to go to the next step. And again, that's just as of this moment where we're at right now.
I think that's accurate,
I'm comfortable with that, certainly, yeah.
so. Okay,
I don't know if this is the appropriate place, but if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask if we could have the manager check with our solicitor to review the original deed for the church property,
St.
for
Joseph.
any deed restrictions that may have been placed on it back in 1920, whatever. Someone may have given that church with a provision that, or that property with a provision that it be used for a church. And I mean, that might affect. So, like I said, I don't know if this is the right place to ask that.
There is no wrong place.
Good.
It's perfectly appropriate, so I'm sure the city manager can do that.
I'd be happy to do that. That's a standalone issue from what you're looking at, the
Yeah.
overlay
Yes.
district.
Yeah,
Okay,
that-
yes, happy to get that research completed.
Yeah, okay. Any other comments from the committee?
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, just procedural-wise, this updated document could go to the city council, and the city council could offer amendments, and if the majority chose to amend this somehow, an amendment could occur at the council level on its way to being referred to the planning board. as well. So there are opportunities.
Or it could go to the planning board and come back to the council for our amendments.
Absolutely as well. Planning board may amend something there and come back. And then it depends on whether it's housekeeping or whether it's something of more significant nature, whether it triggers additional public hearings. But there are opportunities for amendments to occur to this document beyond what gets.
I understand that. I thought I made that clear, this process.
absolutely.
I'm thinking about recommending that it go to the planning board, but I'm not locked and loaded on that,
I think
so.
it needs to go back to the council first because it came from council.
Okay. Okay. Now it's your turn. Members of the public.
Good evening. Tower Shore, Ward 4. Just to answer Dean and just make you all aware that I worked with the ladies down in assessing in regards to the map and the information for the map. I don't know maps, but those ladies did, and that not adding Veterans Square in, that wasn't me, just FYI. I didn't mean to do that. I just wanted to say a couple things. They're all scattered because I was taking notes while you all were speaking. In relation to economic development, I know, Dave, Mr. Bounds, you had questions about that in downtown. I think we're all concerned about that. We want to make sure that going forward, we're, really focusing some efforts in downtown and bringing in new businesses and so forth. I've had some conversations with Exeter. I've kind of called out to some of the current historic district cities and towns in the state. I haven't heard back from a couple of them, but I did get a chance this week to speak with a gentleman in Exeter. And I think we can all agree that sometimes we think of the seacoast and it's got beautiful space and it's got really beautiful historic districts, and they're pretty vibrant, both economically and tourist-wise and so forth. So I had a conversation with him, and I asked a few questions about, do you find that you have problems with new businesses coming in because of the historic district overlay that you have, that would kind of turn people off from coming into the space? He vehemently said, nope, we've really never seen any issues. If people are coming in, they're looking for the character and so forth that we bring with the historic district. I asked about private property as well, residences. Does he find that residences inside of a historic district don't get as much sales? He said he didn't really know specifics about that. He agreed that along the same lines that people purchasing homes inside of a historic district with certain rules and regulations to those are looking to keep them in a certain manner. But he did suggest I call a realtor, which I have not had a chance to do. And I did ask him about economic development, how things he sees things going, and he agreed that the economic development of his area has not seen a slump, really. It's just continued on, and that it's positive. So I would just suggest because I know you guys all have free time, I would just suggest that reaching out in those areas and maybe getting more information about historic districts and their experience might be helpful in understanding how that could be really helpful for us here in Laconia. As well, I know I've mentioned it before, but during this process, perhaps reaching out to New Hampshire Preservation Alliance and New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources. They're there to help with this type of building of an ordinance, of a plan, so they might be very helpful. As well as Lakes Region Planning Association, they were the ones who did all the work on the first the information from 1982. So, and then finally, I would just say, I think we all have the idea that, and we all agree, I think, that the colonial we're all got our fingers crossed and every other part crossed for the colonial to come through. And I would keep in mind as well that if the Lakes Region Planning Commission work that was done in 1982 had actually been put into place at that time, the colonial would not have the deterioration that it has today and the foreseeable financial tasks that we see ahead of us would not be in place. A historic district would have had some regulations on how deteriorated that building could have become. And so I would just consider that going forward. We have some beautiful buildings in this city, and they're all in fairly decent shape as far as I can tell. I'm sure people know better than I on certain ones. But to help us keep going, these types of ordinances would assist in keeping things at a higher level. And comparing that to what we're seeing with the colonial and what could have been, I think is a good way to think a little bit about how we go forward. So I thank you for that. And then I just have a process question. Currently, we're looking at the ordinances and kind of adding to them and melding them closer to what Laconia would be more like instead of the Durham that we built them from. Once those, because I'm going to be positive, once those go through all the different parts, planning and the city council, is it at that point in time that a commission is then appointed? Is that correct? So it goes through and the ordinances are in place, and then a historic district commission is appointed by the city council? Is that how that works?
You know, my knee-jerk reaction is that the commission would be appointed once the ordinance becomes effective. But I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong.
No, the district is created first and the commission comes after.
So the ordinances are put into place in a sense. They're voted through. And then the commission is appointed. Right. So then I would say that, and I understand where you're all coming from. I get the whole don't paint the house yellow. Let's worry about the the signage, windows, all those little nitty-gritty details. I think I speak for everybody here maybe that what we're really looking for is a strong foundation, and that to go through, and that the commission, of course, would then take on the nitty-gritty details of things, because I'm assuming, I think I'm thinking of this correctly, that the commission would have, and I think it says it in there, would have the ability to make changes or to the ordinances going forward, or add things to it going forward, which would then come to this process again, I believe.
Well, I'm no doubt the commission would have the authority to make recommendations, but I don't think they'd be able to make changes. So that would have to come back before the council.
Right, that's what I just said.
Okay.
That if they had, we'd like to make sure that there's no 6-foot signs in the middle of Main Street. That would then come, and they would say, yeah, that's what we want to do. Then it would then come to the council again to say, hey, we'd like to make sure we don't have 6-foot signs in the middle of Main Street.
If you like, Mr. Chair, number 5 in the bottom of page 1 says the commission may from time to time adopt and amend with the approval of the city council and public input such rules and regulations as are consistent with the intention of this chapter and of state enabling legislation.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that clarifies it for me.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jane Whitehead, and I live in Laconia. I sense certain fears. I know you're generally in favor of this overlay district, but I sense certain reservations and certain fears that this overlay district will be either a clamp or an entrapment. Don't think of it as a clamp. It is an overlay. It does not affect any zoning ordinances or decisions that the city makes. It's simply putting a public face on buildings that people in the town have regarded as important and valuable to them. It's like when you were elected mayor, you became a public person. Maybe you chose your clothes a little more carefully in the morning, and you chose the words you spoke, not just to the press, but to your friends. You were a little bit more circumspect, but basically you were just you.
Nah, that didn't happen.
But think of the historic district in that kind of a context, that it simply gives a kind of a luster to the surface and protects it as valuable, as deemed valuable by the people of the town. And as far as entrapment, if you have a building maybe of little or no historic value in between two buildings of great historic value, think of it rather as that the lesser building schmoozing above its social status. So the buildings to each side of it give it luster and give it more value by proximity to it. So, for example, I belong to a club in New York that has an annual dinner, and the astronauts go, and the Cousteaus, and all these mountain climbers, and undersea explorers, Jeff Bezos, and so forth. I'm definitely schmoozing above my prestige level, but I like to think that a little bit of luster wears off on it. So think of the entrapment idea as not entrapment, but in fact giving a kind of added glory and value to the building in between.
Would that be your luster wearing off on them?
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
Okay. Would there anybody else like to be heard? Welcome back.
Anyway, I just have a quick comment. I just
Just
want
because we're in a new hearing, you got to say your name.
again.
Again.
Okay. Paulette Lachlan. I live in Laconia. I just wanted to quickly make a comment. I'm definitely in favor of the historic district. I love all the work that they've done, but I do agree with Mr. Cheney in that I do get concerns if we get too specific in the original document on things like windows and lights, because I look at the restaurant that has placed itself in the railroad station, and I know that perhaps these don't meet those codings, and perhaps they'll be grandfathered in, but when I look at what they've brought to that building and to the people of Laconia, because I know people are attracted to that, even from out of town, because of what they've built up there. So I agree with Mr. Cheney in that particular aspect, that although the historic district is a wonderful idea, and I agree with it in 90% of it, 99% of it, I do worry that if the restrictions that we place in it become too fine, that could be possibly not what we're looking for. So,
Thank you.
My name is Susan Fountain. I'm a native of Laconia and part-time resident. Everything I've heard here when I've come to all these council meetings, I'd like to say I'm obviously very supportive of this overlay district. And I look at our community, and I think a lot of times when I travel and I go to a town or a community, I'm looking for something with character. You know, I'm looking to visit a building that has some historical aspect or something of it. And like when I go to Salem, Massachusetts, one of the things I love about Salem is the historic content that they've preserved in their city. I like walking to all the little buildings and seeing the signage on them, telling me what year the building was built, and also a little bit of the history of that building. I think this committee, or what we're trying to do with this overlay district, we want to preserve the integrity of our city so that people want to come here. People don't want to come here to look at 1970s and 1980s buildings that are really ugly. You know, we really want to draw the commerce into our city, and nobody, in my opinion, is trying to be so specific that we dampen the economic success of our city. I think it's about bringing economic success to our city by preserving our history. Thank you.
waiting. Is there anybody else who would like to comment? Well, I want to thank you all for your time and for coming here. I appreciate it. I think this committee does, and I think the city council does, in terms of your passion and involvement in the city of Laconia. So thank you for your commitment. I mean that. Okay. Now, you said something about this should go back to the city council. I'm going to run with you on this, since you've been doing this a lot longer
The
than
city
I have.
council is the body that needs to refer this to the planning board. A committee can't do that,
The committee can't do
cannot
it.
do that.
Okay. So, I thought they,
This week, though. This next
so,
week.
so what I would do is take a motion to recommend that the city council recommend this to the city council for a recommendation to the planning board to start to iron out the details of an historic overlay district and what we need to do and what we don't need to do. Is that the appropriate motion?
It is, and just to clarify, the intent was, that's why the intent was to schedule that special city council meeting last week. It was in order to receive a recommendation from the committee. The council as a whole body needs to act upon it.
Okay.
Can we make additional recommendations between now and next week?
I think we can make additional recommendations at any time, including at the time the city council considers it. Yeah.
I'm going to differ on that a little bit. I think whatever you vote on tonight is a vote of the committee. Unless you reconvene the committee to amend some language in here, what you vote on tonight would be placed on the agenda for the city council. But at the city council meeting, amendments could be offered up for the council as a whole to act upon before a vote on whether or not to refer to the planning board.
Fair enough.
All right, well, then I'll call this a working document, and that's the latest amendments, I think, to the historic overlay district, and refer that with the comments from our city planner and the comments from our legal, refer that to the city council for further consideration and possibly a recommendation to the planning board. Is that an appropriate motion?
That would be.
Okay. Phew, made it through that one. Yeah,
I'd make the motion.
okay.
Second.
Any discussion? Sensing none, all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that's unanimous. Is there any other business to come before the committee tonight?
I just want to be sure we're recommending to the manager that he seek a review of the deed.
I think he got that.
Okay, thank you.
I think he got that. Okay. Thank you all for your time. I'm adjourning this meeting. 8:03. I got out of here while the sun was still shining.
Thanks, Dean.
It helps the sun doesn't go down till 8:30, but